we're back. Finally, it's been a few weeks. But hello, this is the Wireheads podcast. This is now episode 20.
Yeah.
Because we did 19 from Gen Con. This was going to be 19. We had planned for it to be 19. And then I got busy as fuck finishing up Pay to Win. So that didn't happen.
So Gen Con.
Hello, everybody.
19.
Yeah,
right.
episode that I've called it 19 on my channel at least.
Same.
So yeah,
And I think it kind of keeps up with our order of like who's starting what half. But yeah, hello everybody. I'm Diamond Dust, and of course, as always, with me.
Yes, hello, I'm Emmerron, and I clearly forgot that was my prompt. So. Yeah,
the teleprompter is not on. I'm sorry.
The teleprompter not on. Yeah, we don't have one of those. I didn't invest in that.
All right.
Yeah, no, it's my brain's still just a little bit fried between the head cold I had last week and Gen Con the week prior. So like, forgive me. I'm slowly getting back up to speed. But yeah, it's Thursday instead of our normal Wednesday. So to everyone who's here live with us, hello. It's good to see you all.
And also, as always, we want to thank all of you because it is episode 20. We have made it to episode 20, people. And, you know, like, yes, we also have our little sub episodes that we've interviewed people, but we've made it to 20 episodes on Wireheads. And we still haven't quit yet. So good stuff right there.
We've even done a convention live stream where it was scuffed beyond measure, but we made it. We did it.
But hey, we'll probably figure out what equipment we need, and we could really actually maybe pull one off. Man, imagine actually just see if we can get that one on the books. Actually, live in front of a live studio audience.
Right? Yeah. I don't know what it takes to book it, but I know at Gen Con they do have one of the rooms, like one of those side rooms similar to our game room, that they set up like an actual stage, and they like do actual live events from that room. And I don't know what it takes to book it. I don't know what the event scheduling for that thing looks like, but there is a world in which the potential exists that we might.
Well,
question mark. Probably not. I don't know about next year, but one day maybe we can get into that room. But
I mean,
yeah, I'd settle for just guerrilla streaming on the floor
same.
Itself. That's.
I mean, Valkyrie and I mean, we talked about live broadcasting some of Artal's seminars through my channel, and maybe we could also pipe it through your channel as well, just to get word out what Artal is talking about at the seminar. And
yeah.
Of course, one day you'll be running Gen. No.
One day you'll be
absolutely not.
Very much.
No.
No. I'm not looking to run the biggest convention in gaming. Absolutely not.
Also, on top of that,
don't put that on me.
Probably because of my verbalized distaste for certain business practices of a certain large tabletop game, I probably would never be allowed to. But anyway,
yeah, like I'll settle for being a participant and like someone running a facet of the con, like the game room for Artal, any day of the week. And then in Celestia, Artal COVID.
Oh yeah,
like they got hit very hard, unfortunately. I heard that was not great for them. We dodged it somehow. I didn't get COVID. I just a regular rank and file head cold. Because it was done way too quick for it to be COVID. But yeah, no, that I got lucky. Thank God.
All right. So this week, we're not talking about like anything too terribly special, but something I figured I want to talk about is making effective enemies. Now, when I'm talking about effective enemies, I'm not talking about, insert hardened mook, insert hardened lieutenant. I'm talking about making big bads that really can add some substance to your plot outside, just being the big bad evil guy. I suppose for starts, if we had to look to some of Artal's writing, for example, like in a very short scope of like a big bad that made it interesting, We of course have, you know, the world stat exec from everybody's most memorable first adventure, The Apartment. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, someone that, you know, had a motive, had goals, and was willing to do things to make that happen.
And I think it's really important to note that when we're talking about effective enemies, from the way you're defining this, Diamond, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it sounds like we're talking effective in the sense that they are, you know, obviously a effective in the context of the gig, not necessarily that they are like high reputation or a very like standout, like this person is named so and so. Like, we're not talking Saburo Arasaka, for example, like where they're like memorable in that long form kind of context. They might be memorable for your table, mind you, but like they're not going to be like exactly like, you know, we are dealing with like big bad from this corp and it's the CEO and all of that. We're talking about like on the ground in the moment. This is an effective enemy that you're going to be pitted against.
We're talking about like the big bad of your, you know, your Edge Runners world, like of the small scope of of your Edge Runners in Night City. Because I mean, yeah, of course you throw Adam Smasher at, like I don't know anybody that would throw Adam Smasher at their players for, you know, doing something little like throwing a glass bottle at a car or something. I don't know anybody who would do such a thing like that. But anyway, I'm talking more somebody that when you look at at this big bad, bullets aren't going to be enough to solve the problem by itself. I mean, bullets could possibly solve the problem, but it's going to cause an even bigger problem to happen if you do it that way.
Right. I'm the guy, by the way, that if in case it wasn't clear, guys, she was calling me out for a run we did of CEMK where they threw a glass bottle at the wrong car and all of a sudden, yikes. It was fun. I enjoyed that.
Oh, yeah.
There was a reason that the call was delayed. It wasn't immediate. But yeah, that exec did not like you guys.
Oh yeah, I had to leave with I got away with one hit point. One fucking hit point. I'm like, oh fuck.
And a lifetime's worth of trauma. Oh yeah. No, that's the good stuff. But yeah. If bullets didn't solve the issue, then it just means more time to break out the combat hammers. It's true.
I think perhaps something we should look at, of course, when it comes to creating effective enemies, of course, is motivations.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Emmerron, I don't know if you so much had a big bad during Neon Inferno, so to speak, outside Militech as a collective, but like, did you have?
We did.
We
did. Militech was the complication. They weren't the enemy, which is kind of the funny thing. Though they got the bigger, I would say they got the worst outcome between the two, because the final episode of season 1 was a forked operation. So Operation 1 was the crew with a very small sortie of nomads going in and taking down a regional security agency called Kahukura, who one of the players in their life path, they were the daughter of the CEO of this corporation, and this guy was trying to get in bed with Arasaka. So they'd been fighting Arasaka on this guy's behalf, basically. And this is the guy that smoked all but one of the characters very, very early on in an operation that went south. And they got revenge on him by literally climbing to the top of the tower in Little Europe that this guy called his base of operations, and just like flatlining him with a rocket launcher before firing off an implosion bomb at the base of the tower to collapse it. That was the first part of the operation. And the Militech thing was to keep them off of the party's backs while they pulled the rest of this off. and they decide to just use a nuke they had found against them just to really seal in the flavor. Yeah, so we did have a big bad, and it was someone who was actually hunting the party for like a good chunk of the season, because this guy's like, well, my daughter is edge running, I can't have that, I need to control her. So rather than like beyond a certain point, rather than trying to even reclaim her and bring her home, he's just like, well, I'm just gonna flatline her and all her friends. Like that's the solution I'm gonna do. So like it worked.
Then of course, over my setting we had Deus.
That was fun.
Which I suppose, to catch up for anyone who may not be aware of who Deus was, Deus is a war games AI that was produced as basically a brainchild between R&D of Militech and some of the tech junkies of Ziggurat to solve a problem that the NCPD cannot seem to fix. How to get people out of the combat zone so that way we could start rebuilding the damn city. Because the roaches keep coming out. And so Deus, was this very, quiet, shadowy hand that, Deus's motivations, while not entirely its own, it did come to a final conclusion that, people are weak. It's time for them to step aside. Now, yes, there was a very long manifest written by Deus that, at some point the humans will have to die. But, we averted that crisis.
We did.
But at the end of the day, when, you're dealing with something that has, for lack of a better term, developed its own god complex where it thinks it gets to play God with people's lives, its motivations become very much more, how awful do I have to be in order to complete my goals? And of course, yeah. Toxic gas, firebomb, and I'm trying to think what other horrid things that have I sent out there. But every
you also sicked a horrible homunculus out of the sewers at us too.
Yes. Experiment 23. Yes.
Yeah, that guy. Yeah, the 10-foot tall monstrosity that came charging at us out of a sewer grate. That guy.
He was just a little hungry. That's all.
Yeah. I remember that. Yep. That thing was terrifying.
And then you guys had to deal with Experiment 24 right after 23 because, Deus had another thing in the chute. Instead of a monster, why not just blow the entire combat zone in?
Denial nuke it, just like Mom would have back in the old days. Oh yeah, no, that was a lot. But I mean, those were relatively effective enemies. I think that there's two approaches in my eye to like how you make an effective enemy. The first thing is like, do you want to do something now, or do you want this to be an enemy for like a whole campaign, right? Or at least like an arc of a campaign, right? Like, is this a short-term enemy or a long-term enemy? I think you need to like define that before you can really talk about like how to make each type effective. If I'm talking like from personal experience.
But I suppose like one of the other things, like when we look at those options, of course they have said, make it personal with the players. Mm-hmm. Like, why would the edge runners give a shit about a corporation that's wanting to deal with another corporation? Like, what would happen to them in the whole mix?
Well, 99% of the time for that, it's always going to be about the people involved too. It's not like, again, that's where it's like Militech they weren't the enemy. They weren't the only enemy, right? But Militech was more of a complication than anything else. The fact they got nuked was tough, honestly. It was mostly that they attacked the club that my players were working out of, and the guy who owned that club was Rex Royale. So he didn't like that. And he was kind of on board with just showing them exactly why you don't fuck with the street. The person that my people were after was the CEO of Kahukura. So like, yes, that corporation represents a general threat as an entire whole, right? Because those are the grunts, the mooks that the players are probably going to be fighting at some point. They're fighting these security forces that have been trained. They're fairly well equipped. They're becoming better equipped thanks to Arasaka, but they are not the only thing that the players are going to be tasked with, like, going up against, and they're not the thing that the players are really honestly after. They're after the CEO. They're after the guy who actually is making their life hard. That is like the important thing, I think, to remember when we talk about that.
One of the other things that I look for when I look at motivations of some enemies, everyone wants something and everyone's willing to pay a price for it.
Yeah.
And in the case of Jesper, he was not so much. She wasn't like a long-term enemy in the sense of she wasn't so much like an in-your-face enemy, but she was a link between Deus and Watchman.
Right. Well, she was the conniving third party kind of enemy. Yeah.
She was part of Night Corp when Night Corp is kind of this, shadowy organization at this time. And
right.
At the end of the day, you guys did find out Jesper is trying to shut down the entire operation and trying to get Night City to buckle so that way it would just get pulled into the rest of the NUSA.
Right.
And
and I think that, like, doing that, it was interesting because it tied together a lot of the other conflicts. I think that's what made Jesper effective.
Yep.
Is it's like, here's like 3 different things that you've been fighting, especially since like we had all but like one player in common between the 2 campaigns that kind of all were dealing with the living world that you'd established. So we had like context for like, here's the other end of the conflict that you also now are gonna like be contending with as your other characters. So Jesper was like a kind of a linchpin in like connecting the 2 together pretty tightly.
The only reason why Jesper didn't come around as soon is just because there was a certain lead that kind of kept getting walked past, which it's fine because that would have that was just going to be like kind of like a short circuit that would have pulled in there, which of course, Jesper was also one of the hands that was involved in provoking Maelstrom for Storm Chaser. Basically giving everyone a reason to send Deus to begin with. It was just like, we have all these savage animals out there fucking tearing up the city.
Right.
You gotta do something about it.
Yeah. No, that is very... That's interesting. Okay. And, so she was playing all kinds of sides. That's very interesting.
There's film of, Roy and Crusher beating the shit out of each other on top of Totentons, down to the last breath for each of them, like till they were both tired and the acid rain was pouring on them.
Right. Yeah.
So of course, the more complex you do make an enemy, you're gonna have to write like the way I do some of these enemies, especially. I actually take a note out of Ubisoft's book for for example, Assassin's Creed, Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon, Wildlands, and Breakpoint. There's this web. It shows where your big bad is and how they're tied into each of the many different regions or forms of operations. By
interesting.
Showing, all right, this is lieutenant that answers to the big bad, and this lieutenant's lieutenants.
So you do like a web of, I think they call that a web of intrigue.
Yes,
is the term for that.
Web of intrigue is one of my favorite ways to tell stories. That's
because I think of like Blade Runner, and you almost kind of have to do that in there as well, just because of the way the countdown works.
Yep.
Because at the very least you need, if not like the hierarchy of like your enemy force, you still need to understand like, here's how the events are going to build together into a web of intrigue, sort of like, here's why the big bad cares about what's happening in the case that you're running.
So of course, you know, in the case of 8-Bit and Team Law and Disorder, you know, wiping out some of Watchmen's people during the riot, or not during the riot, but during the fogging, as I like to call it. You know, it popped up on Jesper's radar. It's like, okay, these people need to go.
Right.
So then, you know,
it makes sense. We kind of stood right. Yeah, we stood right in the way of everything they had planned. So yeah, that kind of checks out.
Then, of course, Watchmen got a little bit too big for his britches at Royale's night market, and well, Larry put one right through his eyes. So yeah,
I loved doing that. That was a good moment. I enjoyed the fuck out of that. It's like, you want to sit here, dress me down, and question my motives? Go fuck yourself. That was a beautiful, beautiful time.
So some of the things you gotta look for, though, is, in that case, find, you know, what they want and the steps that they're taking to reach their objective, and then you'll be able to find where to put the underlings and like what landmines you might have for the player to step on. Because already for Black Spark, yeah, I know, I said the thing from the thing last night during episode 2. The title drop has happened.
Well, that means season's over, so that's...
Oh, shit, right. All right, well, guys, thank you so much. Anyway. But yeah, you know, the party's after Project Black Spark, and now they gotta find, you know, all the threads that lead them to wherever this project leads them, wherever this project is.
Interesting. Because when I start developing my enemies, I don't necessarily think of them interlocked in that way, where they are like a web of intrigue, unless like the gig or thing in question calls for it that way. Because like, for example, right, Neon Inferno Season 2, you could kinda sorta, it links together that way, but it's again more like the which bodies are supporting the other bodies and how do they factor in, why do the people that are playing care, and for them it's mostly, you and I were barking up the same tree, which is like, you care because it's your home, right, and your home is suffering an existential threat. In season 2, at least. Season 1 was definitely more about like, there's one man, and this one man is about to make your lives hell for the next 20 episodes. I hope you're ready. But that was life path based. So I think that the other way you could, the other angle I would say you could take from it is, if one of your players in particular has like a very high profile person, right? So we're talking like the head or one of the heads of a like important department within a company, right? Like a corporation. That person can very easily become someone the players have to fuck with in order to like clear the objective. If one of the people in question has dirt on the players, like they can involve people above their pay, right? Or above like what we would consider to be like their pay grade, right? Like maybe they're just kind of street scum, but unless they've like actively made themselves untouchable somehow, by and large, we're not worried about them until that has happened, right? So you can wipe out an enemy early if they're regular street scum, but just remember, even street scum sometimes have friends in high places, and that is like very important. So I think if any of you out there are like not as organized, because I know I'm not as organized as Diamond is in this regard, doing a web of intrigue as like a full planning document is not something I do well because my brain doesn't work that far in advance. I generally am planning maybe 3 to 4 episodes in advance with a general end goal of like a season in mind as like where I want things to end up, and I kind of just work incrementally toward that. What I would recommend is if you're developing even a base level enemy for like a gig, even if their like timeline is 1 gig, where the players are meant to kill or otherwise defeat them, incapacitate them at the end of a gig, roll them a life path. Start there, because holy shit, are life paths helpful for this.
Oh, yeah.
Adds a ton of motivations, gives who they're connected to, might give you ideas on who their enemies are, because those then become, you know, the enemy of my enemy is my friend in a lot of cases. So that is like a potential ally that just doesn't know that they're friends with the party yet. And then you can bring them in. So life paths are like hella useful for developing your enemies, even if they're like 1 gig type enemies. And if they're going to be multi-gig enemies, then this just adds a ton of extra context, flavor, etc., that you can just layer on top to like make it work for your people.
All right. One of the other things that I suppose I'm more looking at this like taking this one out of Yoshi P's handbook as well is, for example, most of you guys have been along for the ride with me so far in FF14, where you know you watch as the progression of each story. There's usually going to be, oh, okay, you know what? For example, A Realm Reborn. All right, we'll use A Realm Reborn all the way up to Ultimate Weapon. There are these like major road bumps that you'll have to look into that. While you could use the web of intrigue to get there, it may help you plan more for like that greater enemy at the end of this, you know, so many missions or so many sessions. Like, you know, 5 or 6 sessions if you're looking at long scale, but like 4, for example. And like for me, I find that like 4, like 3 like mini bosses leading up to a major boss, I feel leads up to a really good like short campaign if need be. In that case.
Well, and Prepper Jack asks, and I don't know if we want to cover this now because it's definitely on topic, or if we want to do this during Q&A. But Prepper Jack asks, what about attacking from social angles?
That's another one.
I think. Yeah, and I think ultimately, like, it still follows the same development idea as you would for any other enemy, because it's like you're still developing the person as like a complete person, and then it's just more a matter of like, how do you want to supplant them? Like, that'd be the media's line of attack half the time, is a social line of attack. They're not going to be trying to tear someone down by like sticking a gun in their face and pulling the trigger. They're going to be doing things to subvert them and like make them less powerful by like talking them down, you know, harassing them, or getting others more likely to like harass them and deride them and all of that. So yeah.
The other thing also with social conflict, which actually we witnessed today. Sometimes, you know, clever wordplay and like hitting someone in the gut with information that they didn't think that you know about them can get them the right way, because we're working through Haven't Got a Stitch to Wear. So, spoilers. We're working through Haven't Got a Stitch to Wear.
Yeah.
The main character, or like the major antagonist in here, we find out what his actual name is alongside
Yeah.
his street handle. So when he answers my fixer ends up calling this guy up, and he answers the phone with his handle, and I'm like, well, hi there, Harry, how you doing?
Yeah.
Just
Exactly.
name dropping him. I
Yeah.
That's got to be a little unsettling when someone knows information about you that you don't expect them to know.
Right. It's like, oh, damn. Okay. Well, this is now very personal. It was doubly appropriate because Diamond here rolled a 31 to the guy's 2. He literally imploded his face down check while she exploded on perfect 10s,
Yep.
which is just insane. That was so fun. So good. But yeah, I think ultimately a lot of it just boils down to, like, how do you want to navigate um how do you want to navigate, I guess, the angle of attack? But if you have a life path for them, it will give you all of those angles.
So I
think
gotta ask, did you do that for Mr. K in Neon Inferno 2, Afterglow?
I knew what his motivations are. I didn't roll him a life path, but I knew what his motivations would be, and I knew the sort of angles he'd play to get there, which is really what the life path is built to do anyway. It's supposed to just simplify that thinking. I didn't really need it just because Mr. K is a very well-defined character in the lore. So, like, imagining, like, the lore is what guides you, right? And life path is like a stand-in for lore in a lot of cases, in my opinion, right? Like, it is our character's personal lore, it's our character's story, it's our character's connections. But if a character has already been fairly well defined in the lore, at the very least for Mr. K, in like what their position in the city is, the power they wield, the sort of people that they have at their, beck and call, all of that, I think it made it so I didn't really need the life path for him, right? But his motivations were very clear. He wanted, he's the kind of guy who's like, I jealously guard all my information. I'm the guy who knows things. I'm the guy you come to when you need to solve something. And then, like, I'm going to use that against you, right? And if I want something, nothing's going to stop me from getting what I want, mostly because I have dirt on every faction that would stand in my way to getting what I want. So, like, he has leverage for days and days and days. Well, he did, until he wound up dead at the bottom of a 3-story building, and then the party took every bit of leverage he ever had over anybody. And, well, we haven't resolved that thread quite yet, but suffice it to say that leverage has gotten in the hands of people. Yeah. We are resuming Neon Inferno on Monday, so make sure you tune in. Yeah.
One of the other parts to creating effective enemies that I do see as well. Not every enemy is going to be willing to put themselves in danger, or willing to raise a gun at the party. Like, it doesn't have to be your big bad, but it could be an underling that, some effective
Right.
enemies might not be so much effective in being opposition towards you, but they could be effective in helping your story along by, being, being the fruit that gives the juice, so to speak.
If you want to see a really good example of a stat block that's built for this kind of a character, by the way, guys, those of you who own Danger Girl Dossier, look at Fiona Hayes' stat block in there, and you'll get a really good idea. She is a boss level enemy, not because she can kill you. She's a boss level enemy because of what she can influence others to do to you. And she can just sit on top of her ivory tower, hands clean as a whistle, and just be like, all right, what are you gonna do to me and my army of adoring fans? Like,
media rank 6. And as long as she get 4 pieces of information on you, she rolls as if she was media rank 8.
Yep. She's terrifying. She is completely
Also,
terrifying. Medias are scary as hell. People don't think of it, but medias are like genuinely terrifying.
and maybe a little bit more on the street side that are actually, well, Trey Santiago, even though he's not,
Yeah.
media rank 6.
He's a media.
He's media rank 6 though. He is.
Yeah.
So you have that kind of stuff going on, like.
Right. Like it's important to remember that for every broadcast corporate face that exists out there like Fiona Hayes, there are equally powerful people working in the underbelly of the society that Night City promotes. And like Trace Santiago is one of them. As a matter of fact, we're going to talk a little more about Trace actually in the second half of today's episode, because he is part of a larger group of edge runners that, in my opinion, don't get talked about nearly enough as a group. They get talked about every now and then individually. Trace, I would argue, is the one with the probably largest reputation or recognition out of them. But there are a couple of characters there. We'll be talking about them.
Also, I don't know if I'd want to lay a finger on someone like Fiona Hayes either.
No.
She has trauma team executive. They'll drop everything to go get her. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, no.
Yeah, what are you gonna do against me, my adoring fans, my trauma team subscription, and the corporation that is built to support me?
And the solo on payroll.
Literally, Fiona is like their biggest brand too. If you think about it from that angle, they will sacrifice everything to keep her alive. It's terrifying. She's terrifying. Don't fuck with Fiona Hayes. But do look at her stat block. If you want to see a social boss and how a social angle of attack can work against your party, that is the one. Look at that.
And she's reputation 9.
Oh yeah. No, that everyone knows who Fiona is.
One step down from Adam Smasher.
I mean, yeah. I mean, it makes sense. She's been around since I think the 20s, and around, right? Like again, she is not, we're kind of told like she's not one person. She's many different people.
What are you talking about? It's the same person from before.
Right. It's still the same person 50 years later, and she hasn't aged a day. I'm sure.
It's just some biosculpting,
Yeah. God, that's some good biosculpting to keep her like she hasn't aged a day in 50 years. Really, it's incredible what modern medical technology is capable of.
One of the other things, I suppose, with enemies as well, that I look at, and the higher up your enemy is, like, don't be afraid to give them some rep. Don't be afraid to make it to where your party, if they try to do a face down against that enemy, they're gonna get shook up. I would care to think, if we were to take someone, for example, Crusher. Crusher is one of those, you don't go looking for trouble. You don't go, wandering into the hot zone hunting down Crusher. And, one of my party here recently, they were, they were all big and bad. They were going to go do a job. They've been feeling a little invincible recently. That was until they become until they got word that Crusher was in the same building that they were looking for something. So take that out of Alien Isolation's book. Just this big, massive killing machine that's also stealthy as fuck, rolling at base 18.
Yeah. I mean, rolling anything at a base 18 is already so fucking scary. Like, if you were going to resist it, if you have the option to even resist it, right? You're not, probably, unless you also have a base 18 and the resistance skill. And if you don't, well, you better crit, or you might be able to do it on like a base 16. Okay. Base 16 v base 18, you could maybe do it, right?
Oh, yeah.
2-point discrepancy, it's possible. Anything lower than that, you're really reaching. It's really, hard.
The
Not last. What if I wanted Gundams in my Cyberpunk? Is that an effective
see,
enemy?
back in Cyberpunk 2020, you could have Mechton show up in Cyberpunk.
We had APCs back in the day. We don't have those, at least not yet in Red. Which one of these days we might. But I think enough guidance has been given to like maybe do an APC now, because all you really need is like an external linear frame of sufficiently large, mass to carry some of the weapons you would want to have on like a mech or a Gundam or something akin to that.
I don't know
but
how
yeah,
you can
like
afford such a thing.
I think like if Mike ever gets done with Mechton Zero, I think is the one he was working on. Because he mentioned he was still cooking that at Gen Con last year. And I'm just sad we didn't get an update from him because he wasn't able to make Gen Con this year. That may well run on Red Interlock, but we don't know. So like if it does, then technically like we'll have the rule system lining up close enough to be able to run them. That said, we might be talking scales, like on one hand, if you got a Mechton, that's rolling the same kind of dice an Edgerunner would, that's going to obviously be very different. You'd probably like double the dice or whatever, depending on the size of the mech. Armored Core Night City. Jesus Christ.
Oh no.
I mean, if you heard the things I heard, Nyla, about Mechton when Mike talked about last year, he had like concept art of people in these, Mechton suits that were like not soldiers, right? Like it was like a mom with like her kids in the back of this thing. And like she was going to the grocery store in it. And it was like an everyday life kind of scene, but they're using giant mechs as their vehicles instead of cars. So I'm like, it's sufficiently ridiculous is what I'm saying. And I would be interested to see if those could play together nicely when we get the full rules for whatever Mike's cooking. Because that'd be fun. It'd be real fun.
Oh. Well, I got a question for you though, Emmerron. When it comes to like some of the greater plots that we have for enemies out there, I mean, what are like some of your favorite go-tos in this case? Like what are your old reliables for the plot?
You mean like just for like archetypes in general?
Yeah.
So I am a big fan of looking over player life paths and finding enemies, and starting there. That is like my ground zero for like workshopping what could be coming down the chute at you. Barring that, so if your crew gets lucky, and this is where I'm beginning to debate in the future, eschewing the normal way of rolling enemies and friends that was in Red's core rulebook and doing it the way they do it in the CEMK, which is roll a d6 on I think it's like a 1 through 3, you have no enemies or friends. On a 4 or a 5, you get 1, and on a 6, you get 2. That way of doing it is far better than D10 minus 7, in my opinion. Because the only real difference is if you roll a 10 on D10 minus 7, you have 1 additional friend or enemy. But I would much rather shoot the middle and roll a 50-50 on whether or not there is an enemy at all. And on the 50 up, have a potential chance of there being 2, right? Just because I think it adds a lot more texture to the world to have that be an element to begin with. And like, while the CEMK does a little more with it, just for the, enemies and friends existing at all, I think that in a wider campaign that also lends itself pretty nicely. But barring that, if I get to the place where like my players have no friends or enemies. Because I have seen that happen before, like no one rolls a friend or an enemy. Then we start talking about, okay, well, like, what are your goals, right? And the best part about most life paths, well, all life paths really, once you get to the role-based level, someone is gunning for you. And barring a traditional enemy, the someone gunning for you is going to come into play. And that's where I start defining who or what that is. You know, who is that entity? Are they a single person? Are they a group? Like, what are their goals? And that's where we start rolling a life path for that person or the group, you know, and start defining, like, well, why do they want you, right? What do they want from you, a solo on the street who works for no one in particular? Well, like, they have maybe been on the other end of your gun before, and they're taking the approach of, well, maybe if we get them working for us, maybe we don't get shot later, or maybe we get them to shoot someone important and they're loyal enough to the Eddies that they'll go after them, right? On the other side, on the flip of that, well, if we can't get them to our side, maybe we just try to kill them instead. And then they become an enemy, right? Because that is a fluid category. So yeah, I really like attacking from a personal angle. I think that that's my favorite way to kind of do things. And I don't do Web of Intrigue type stuff nearly as often because I find it does too much to remove the main reason why the players are invested on a street level, unless like the threat is more existential. If the threat is an existential one, we're talking a very different kind of campaign, and those I find like Web of Intrigue works great for.
Oh yeah.
But if we're not talking existentialism and we're talking personal, then you need a personal enemy.
And like for me, whenever I do Web of Intrigue, I always will look to the life path first and see where I can tie players in together, where it just might so happen that, you know, the exec's enemy happens to know the solo's friend, who happens to know the tech's, you know, ex-lover. And, you know, you can really find a way to, you know, draw in the blackmail, draw in the, you know, the ransoms. It makes it a little bit more interesting.
Right. Yeah, and I agree with that. Like, once you expand the Web of Intrigue, because someone is so powerful and it is personally involved, and now we're just defining what are the tiers of the force they can throw at you. Like, Neon Furnace Season 1 was very much like that. Like, here's this one very powerful person who clearly has connection to a lot of powerful people. And then, like, we just have to define who those powerful people are. That's where the Web of Intrigue then kicks in. But first, I think when I'm defining an enemy, right, my first thing is a litmus test for, like, how invested are my players in this being their enemy? So if the players don't buy in, then there's no point in me, like, worrying about all that back end shit, right? The players need to buy in. And, like, once I've threatened them enough, then I'll go and start doing those things. That's why I usually plan somewhat incrementally. I've had too many campaigns go off the rails and be like, okay, here's what I'm planning to have happen. And the party says, hold up, wait a minute. We don't care about any of that shit. What we do care about is over here. And I'm like, well, there goes 10 sessions of prep just right out my fucking window. Okay, let's redefine what I'm planning for now. So once I have the buy-in, then I feel a little more comfortable, be like, okay, here's what's going to happen now. And like working that plot thread out a little ways. Once I have like a clearer idea of like, what do my players care about? What do their characters feel invested in? And like, as they get defined as like actual people in a wider sort of unfolding story and world, like what are those things going to look like?
Like the hooks especially are a good way to tie, like if you're doing a campaign, it's a really good way to tie it in.
Yeah.
One of the ones that I haven't really played yet is Crisis, where like the the party just gets swept up in the middle of just some absolute in the middle of an absolute mess, and they gotta swim their way out of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and that's where we start talking about like existentialism, because then it is like you will be wiped off the playing field if you don't do something to resist this. And then it becomes about armed resistance against an overwhelming force, which is like beautiful. I love that shit.
Yeah, but then you find ways to tie the Crisis into the party's backstory, and then presto, it makes it personal for the party outside outside it falling in their lap.
Right. Like, when you mentioned this one already, but The Apartment, I think, does a really good job of like illustrating how that works. Even getting paid out of easy mode has a sort of hook to align with that, of like, you're already done with one leg of a gig, now you just got to get paid. And it's like, well, if you don't do the gig that is written now, like, you don't get paid. And that is an existential threat, even if it doesn't sound like one, because like, goddamn, rent's due tomorrow, Chuma. I hope you got the 2,000 eddies you were promised, because that's the only way you're paying for that cargo container and the food you need for the month. Like, whew, that sucks. That sucks bad. So yeah, that's one of those things too, of like existential threats in the time of the Red. Obviously, they might not, unless you've experienced that kind of like, poverty in real life, which like I know, Diamond, we've talked before, some of that you've got some personal experiences with. You don't think quite like, oh, that's existential. Are you kidding me? What's 1,000 eddies or whatever? Like, that's chump change. That's no problem. I can come up with that like that, until you can't. And then all of a sudden it's like, living on the street is bad in Night City. It's bad. You don't want that.
So, on to the second half.
I suppose, yeah, we are in an hour. Shit, that flew. All right, very cool. Well, we're technically, I think, a little shy of an hour, but that's okay. I have no issue with that. I have a movie date later anyway, so if we wrap a little early, I can just get ready.
All right.
So we planned around this, so we're not rushing, just to be very clear on that. But yeah, I think the second half of the episode, so technically this is your outro.
Yeah. But all right, guys. Links in the description below to take you to the second half, where we will be talking about major cast members in Cyberpunk. And of course, as always, if you enjoy what we do over here at Wireheads, we're normally on Wednesday nights, but I don't know. What do you think about Thursday afternoon, Emmerron? Like,
if we want to keep it, I'm not going to say no.
We'll see how we feel about it.
We're going to workshop it. We kind of said, to be fair, I think before Gen Con even, we were kind of like, okay, like, some things are going to slide around post Gen Con, and that could change some things. And if it slides in a particular way, like, we'll roll with the punches. So stay tuned. We might switch to this, because this is like right after I run a game that Diamond is also part of. So this aligns fine for our schedules, as long as we
also
stay out of conflict.
Earlier in the day as well.
Right, so we can do some other things, which is kind of nice, and we can actually stream for an audience that is, kind of like our West Coast is still a little early, but like East Coast, I know you guys are getting off work, or if you work a normal 9 to 5 at least, you're off work already the further east you go from me. So like, yeah, this could work as a neat little time slot. We'll have a look. We'll get back to you, but. Bottom line, normally, at least for now, Wednesdays at 8:30, Pacific is when we do this live. But yeah, if you'd rather us do it on Thursday afternoons at 4:30 Pacific, I am not going to say no. I think that's a great time slot, and it opens my evenings up a little more, which is always appreciated. But But yeah, I think that'll be it for part 1. So we will see you over on my channel for part 2.
Bye-bye now. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.